Hey everyone, Synth Designer here. Today I'm starting a video series called Sound Design Basics. Now this is aimed for beginners, and I wanted to show you how to use some of the basic wavetable forms. And in this episode, I'm going to show you how to use the saw wave. Now, the idea behind this series is really to show you that you don't need complicated wavetable forms to get great sounds. It's just a misconception, I think, today that you need to design some and use some of the most complicated wavetable forms to get good sounds, and that's just not true at all. So in this episode, I really wanted to focus just on the saw wave and how it works. So to start, I kind of wanted to take you briefly and show you how the saw wave looks on a spectrum analyzer. So this is Span, and this is actually available for free, so go out and download it. It's a really useful program for a lot of different reasons, but I'm going to use it and show you how a saw wave actually looks on a spectrum analyzer. So I'm going to play C. And as you can see, the highest peak here is the C. But you can also see that there's all these other notes here. And now our ears perceive C, and underneath that sound is essentially all these other notes. And that shows you the richness of the harmonic content of the saw wave. Now, relevant to this video, you don't need to know all the scientific reasoning and theory behind sound waves. What you need to know is how to use it and how it sounds and how it works. That is what we're trying to get after in this series and in this episode. So to start, let's just see how we can play around with it. Here's one oscillator, and we'll just start with one oscillator. We won't go into the envelopes I'm not going to go into LFOs at all in this series. I just kind of want to show you kind of the versatility of it, just with one saw wave, and then later on we'll move on to two possibly. So here we go. Let's start with a very basic chord progression that I already put down, and here it is. It's in C major, and here's how it sounds. Okay, so it's not exactly the most pleasant sound to it. And I agree, there's a lot left to be desired with this sound. However, you can hear right away the character of it, at least. It's very buzzy, and it has a certain raw tone to it. You know, it's familiar in a lot of ways, even if it's not completely familiar in this form yet. So how can we get to something a little bit more interesting? Well, we use filters for that. Filters essentially cut off certain frequencies. In this case, we're going to be doing a low pass filter, and we're going to be just playing around with this cutoff knob. As you can see, it's moving around. And the reason why I'm using Serum today is because it's so visual. Basically any synth you'll use is the same principles, but you just might not be able to see it as well. And that's why for beginners, I think Serum is a great learning tool. So here we go. Let's play it again. So immediately it's at the halfway point for cutoff, and it's already much lower in tone. And it's got that warmth to it all of a sudden. We didn't do anything other than turn this on and kind of move this knob around. So let's see what happens when we move it back this way. See, we're cutting off more and more of the higher frequencies. And now we're cutting less of them off. And I mean, already, I'm sure that's a familiar sound, whether it's pop music, EDM, a lot of different styles within the 80s and into the 90s. I mean, the saw wave is so common in so many different sounds that you'll hear. So let's move on and try to give it even a little bit more character. So here we go. I'm going to do what's called upping the unison here. And now you got that stereo sound to it, right? So as you can see by the blend knob here, you have 3 voices of unison. And it sounds really bad because there's so much detune on it. But let's turn that down a bit. Open up the filter. So you can hear, we're not doing anything fancy at all. All we're doing here is adding a little bit of unison, and we're adding a little bit of detune and messing around with the filter cutoff. That's it. These are very basic chords. But these are the fundamentals you need to know when you're a beginner. You need to know what the saw wave fundamentally sounds like so you can use it in your own music. So let's move on here and go to pattern 2. Now I cloned this, and all I did here was take the same basic chords, but I added a bass note to them. So I wanted to show you how it would compare. And let's play that. Now, you can hear it's a little bit richer because we have that bass note in the sound here. And what I also did was moved around one of these notes here. So I did what's called a different voicing. And that itself is a way of kind of expressing sound design differently. Giving yourself a different voicing gives the sound a completely different character. So let's go back to this first preset, take off all the unison and take off the filter and compare pattern 1 to pattern 2, just in their most basic forms. So here's pattern 1. So you can hear, just by moving a couple notes here, we're getting already a richer sound. Now let's do the same things we did before and add a little bit of unison. And then turn on the filter, and let's hear how that sounds now. You can hear the warmth of it already. I mean, that is a classic sound for so many different genres. You'll hear some variation of this throughout basically the last 4 or 5 decades when it comes to synthesizers. So it goes to show, like, you do not need complicated wavetables to get good sounds. Now, I'm not saying this is going to work in a lot of music. This is very basic. You'll need a lot more than what I just played. However, it's a good way to get the fundamentals down. And now you understand what a saw wave sounds like, and you could use these principles. Now, I wanted to show you one more thing before we stop and go to a stock plugin. The reason why I use Serum is because it is a great visual synth. Now, GMS is a stock plugin, and I'm going to show you that these principles work the exact same no matter what. So this is on pattern 3. I'm going to go to pattern 3, and we have the new voicing here. And I'm going to show you GMS. You don't need expensive synths to get good sounds. So let's start here. Again, very familiar sound. Only one oscillator here is playing. This is the sawtooth. But let's see what we do when we bring up the voices. already getting such richness because there's some detune here. Move it around a little bit. And get that stereo width here. There you go. Just like that, you have some great character to it. From just a saw wave. Nothing complicated, nothing fancy at all. It's just the basic saw wave with some different voices, some stereo, and some detuning. So remember that as a beginner, get used to the fundamentals and play around with just the basics, starting with the saw wave. You'll immediately start to recognize so many of the sounds that you'll probably remember from different genres and different songs that you love. So, and I just wanted to show you maybe one more thing here before we stop. And that is that I'm playing these lush chords here, but don't forget you can use these in different ways. If you haven't already, you should check out my ADSR basics playlist to show you how the envelopes work and how you can use attack, decay, sustain, and release very effectively. So I'm not going to get into the basics of that here, but you can learn this in basically under 10 minutes, and you'll start to be able to produce all different kinds of sounds. But I wanted to show you very quickly what happens when you turn down the sustain. So you get, obviously you don't get that long sustained sound. You get the pluck to it. And of course, we've all heard a different type of pluck or a kind of pluck for different saws throughout different types of music. Sorry, I'm not a very good piano player, but you get the idea. Saws are ubiquitous. They're everywhere, and you don't need to do too much with them to get great sounds. Now, obviously, you'll need a little bit more character, some reverb. Some delay here. But I mean, think of the 90s and all that house techno music, and you'll hear so much of this. It's just so common. So that's basically the saw wave. So remember, when you're just starting out, don't get too complicated and just play around with one saw and one oscillator at a time and see what kind of sounds you could get. I can guarantee you will not run out of sounds using the saw. So I hope you like this video, and I'll see you next time.